This is the Realacc RFX185 frame. And I don't know if you can see this too well. Let me see if I can adjust the lighting. It's weighing at 228 grams. Now I want to talk about this frame. This is my very first build, and this is not recommended as your first build, but I did it anyways. And I used this HGLRC V2 F3 flight controller PDB, and I did the Realacc 4-in-1 20 amp ESC with the BB2 chip. So this is the version 2. And one of the problems I'm having with this is originally I ordered some different motors, and the motors had 12 millimeter spacings, and these are 16 millimeter. So I used some Emax 2204-2 motors that I had, and those are 19 millimeter by 16 millimeter. The one thing I don't like about that is the motor wires, the contacts for the motor, have to be mounted so that they come out the edge like that, which I guess with tri-blades maybe that's not too bad, but these definitely could take some damage in a crash, so I'm not thrilled with that. Now a better choice would have been some 1806 motors, because they typically have 16 millimeter by 12 millimeter spacings, and those would have been able I would have been able to run the motor contacts straight down or wrap them over and under. More than likely I would have just ran them straight down, because it would have been more reliable and less prone to damage. I chose to go with the X without the supports. I did not put the supports in. I've got one of those A8C little micro fly sky receiver that you can get from Banggood. I got some Racecraft 5051 props on here. I don't know how, I haven't flown it with these on, but yeah, it wasn't too hard to build. One of the problems I did encounter was with this camera. This is a Fat Shark camera, and live and learn. Don't buy all the parts until you have your frame. Buy the parts after you get your frame assembled, and then figure out what's actually going to fit. When I tried to put this inside there, you can see the way that's mounted. There's quite a bit of height right there. So it's not quite a half an inch, but it's more than a quarter. And that's a significant amount. And you don't have much room to work with in here. So trying to mount that camera in there, you see you don't have room. Now perhaps an HS 1177 camera with the mount, which is kind of flatter and goes down the side, would have worked better than this. So that's why I don't have a camera mounted on it yet. I did take it out for a maiden flight, and I loaded it up with Betaflight 3.01, flashed it with the SP Racing F3 hex, and set it up for multi-shot, and it flew really well. I didn't notice that I would need to do any tuning with it whatsoever. Maybe just set the rates. One of the problems I did have, my inexperience with soldering, I guess, is I didn't have any problems with the smaller contacts because I have a very fine-tipped soldering iron, so those went together real well. What I did have a problem with was soldering the large ones, which is kind of humorous, right? You'd think that would be the easier ones, but with a fine-tipped soldering iron, not so easy. I went out and purchased for my next build a larger tip just for these larger contacts to make it easier. So I have a much better soldering than I did here. And I did check all these wires to make sure that they're firm. And yeah, they're not coming off. So, experience. It was an interesting learning experience putting this together. Now the battery strap, there is a place for a battery strap here on the bottom, but you can't really put a full-size battery strap. I just took one of these bang grid straps and cut it down to size. Let me see if you can see that. Whoa. See if I can get a focus on it. There we go. So I just cut it down to size to make it easier. But yeah, it flies great. I love it. In fact, I've ordered the 160 frame. But I will be considering what type of camera to put in there. I'm actually thinking of putting a micro camera in there. That'll give me a lot more room, and they're pretty cheap. So there you go. I have some ideas on this, and I'm going to share them with you on the web. Alright, so here we are. We're on the web now. And this is the actual flight controller that I ordered. $26.90. And if we look at it, has these nice pictures, has an IO1, an IO2. And it has these contacts here, this UR2. And one of the things that I want to show is that when we look at the board that I got, very similar to this, except it did not have the IO1 and IO2. In fact, if you flip the board over on the opposite side of the spectrum connector, what it has is several connectors for ULX, which is not in this picture. So if you order this board, it may not be exactly the same as what you see here, and so the wiring diagram could be mostly the same but a little bit different. You will want to, if you're doing S-bus or I-bus, you will want to go to the back side of the spectrum and do the 5 volt and the ground and the signal. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. You won't have these two ports here. I think you end up with one of them. So if we look at some of the other flight board options available at Banggood, you can find this one here. Let me see. The OZE32 AIO 6DOF with integrated OSD current sensor. You get an extra 35% off with this coupon. And this is pretty cool because one of the features that it has on it is that you can take the 4-in-1 Racer Star ESC and you can connect it straight up to, let me see if I can get a picture of it. It has this connector, I believe it's this one, that you can use to hook up to the 4-in-1 ESC. The 4-in-1 ESC has 6 wires coming out of it, and let's see if we can get to that. So this is the one that I have. Now this one says it's D-Shot capable, but it does not come preloaded with D-Shot. And you can see these 6 wires. Now the positive wire here doesn't actually have any voltage coming through it. And these are the 4 signal wires for each of the motor signals. But a better choice, they now have a very similar one to that. And let me see if I can find it. Here it is. This is the Racer Star V2 20 amp 4-in-1 ESC, and this is that connector cable. Now here's something cool. I showed you the OZE, which is basically a clone of the Omnibus F3 AIO. And if you look here, it's $24.99. It's pretty cheap, and this is the genuine. The other one that you were looking at was the clone. And the connector for the motors, let's see if we can zoom in on that. So this one has F303. It runs Betaflight, has SPS 8 PWM output, 1 through 4 pin headers, and the SH1 and the SH 1.0 plug. So, and then 5 and 6 as pin headers. So you can run 6 motors on this. So this one will directly connect to the 4-in-1 ESC. You can take that cable and basically connect it straight up. I think it might be this one. Let me see. But one of the things that I wanted to show is right here, Ready to Fly Quads. So you can actually purchase this right from Florida, USA, if you're living in the States. And There it is, the V2. And it's $23.99. Now, I ordered one of these. I haven't installed it yet. I ordered one. I ordered it on a Friday, and it was waiting in my mailbox on Monday. And I live in Arizona, so it's like complete other side of the country. And this comes with the SD card reader. It has the Betaflight on board. It has a built-in 5-volt regulator, which with this one you wouldn't really need, because this one actually outputs 5-volt LBEC, unlike the other one I showed you. This one actually outputs 5 volts on the connector there. The red connector actually has power going, so you could power your flight controller directly from there. But this one has a nice feature that it has a built-in Betaflight 3.0 OSD, so you can see the OSD right there in Betaflight and configure it. I really like that, and for the price, you know, if you buy 3, save 9%. It's got the MPU 6000 over SPI, so you can get, you know, those really fast 8K PID loop. I think this is a much better choice for that combination of the RFX 185 frame with the Race to Start 4-in-1 20 amp ESC, simply because it has many more features. It's actually cheaper than the HGL-RC flight controller. And here's the thing. I love Banggood. I've ordered lots of parts from Banggood. But when I placed my order for the RFX 185 frame, it took... Normally my orders take 9 days to get here, but it took closer to 5 weeks for me to get my order. And when I went to the tracking, it had left China. It arrived somewhere in Chicago or New York, something like that. And I was like, oh good, it's here. I'll be getting it. Well, then it left and showed back up in China. And then I got another notification that it left China again. And then it got to the States the second time, and it shipped out. And then like a week later, I get another notification that it shipped out again on its way to Arizona. So evidently it went to China and back. It went to Arizona and back, and then back to Arizona. So there were problems with my shipping on my order. It just kept on bouncing back and forth between China and the US, and then Arizona and Chicago, I believe it was. And that's crazy. I ended up waiting 5 weeks to get my order. I got my Flip 32 F3 Omnibus V2 in 2 days. Now, if you don't live in the United States, then, you know, that's not really going to help you much. But Airbot, you know, I don't know where Airbot is based out of. Not really sure. Let's see if we can find out over here. Customer service. About us. It says they're made in China and sent around the world. But I do know that the one that's on Banggood, the OZE, is actually a clone of the Omnibus AIO. So it's not the real deal, but this one is. And you can order it directly from Airbot, or you can order it from several other websites. These are the websites: Do FPV, they're a genuine reseller. Let's see what this link is for. Ledge Team. But regardless, I just think that is a much better choice than the $26 one that I ordered. Now, let's take a look at some other things that I think are pretty interesting. So if we look at motors, these are pretty cool. I actually bought 4 of these from my local hobby store, hobbyaction.net. They're based out of Tempe, Arizona, and they had them a full week before Banggood had them. And I just drove up to the shop and picked up 4 RS2205S 2300 kV motors. Sure, you're going to save 25 bucks if you order them here, but if you got a local hobby shop, they might have them, and you don't have to wait. But let's take a look at these. And this is where the motor threading I was talking about. So the 19-inch spacing and the motor's wires will run down the length of your arm. A 16mm spacing, and they're going to be kicking off to the side. So I do not recommend 2205, 2204, 2206, no 22mm motors for this frame, which is kind of a downside, because if you really want to build an absolute screaming machine, you're going to have those wires poking out the side. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem in the event of a crash. Like I have heard other reviewers say about this frame, if you're, this is not a durable frame. It's built for one thing, racing, and only racing. But we can take a look at some of these other motors for a more durable build. You could go with some of these 1806 motors. Now let's look at these. Let's look at the diagram. There's one set of Racer Star motors on here that are 12mm by 12mm spacing, which would not work for the 185 frame. These are 16 by 12, so these would work. And so the 16 will end up with the motor wire running down the length of the arm, because it's the larger number. And I believe they have some other 1806 motors on here that are pretty cool. Let me see. There's the DYS. Those might be a pretty good choice. Let's look at those. Especially, for like, if you're running 4-inch props, then you would want to go with the 2700 kV. Now let's look at the motor spacing on this. 16 by 12, 4M3. So those would work fine. Or 1806. Let's just type in 1806. Plus edition. Those are nice. So that's what I'm going to recommend, that you verify that you have 16 millimeters and that the 16 millimeter spacing is your primary spacing. Now there are some 1806 motors on here that you do want to avoid. You're like, oh, $26, I'm already there. Right on. That's the mistake that I made. I did not check. These are M2s and they're all 12 millimeters. You don't want to order these motors for that frame. You'll be sitting there with 4 motors that you're not using. Bummer. So there you go. I think that pretty much wraps it up.